The radios did not fail. No one had pressed the wrong switch. Red flag simply went quiet. Over the Nevada desert, dozens of aircraft were converging into what should have been a routine training merge. Controllers expected the usual cascade of calls, range control instructions, excited pilot chatter, rapid-fire kill claims. Instead, an unnatural silence spread across the frequency. Screens were still alive, tracks were still moving, but the airspace sounded empty. At the center of it all was a Eurofighter Typhoon, clean lines, twin engines howling, flown by a European pilot invited to measure himself against the most guarded fighter in American inventory. Across from him, unseen, was the F-22 Raptor. No afterburner glow, no radar spike, no warning tone, just absence. The Typhoon pilot knew the Raptor was there. Everyone did. Red flag rules guaranteed it. Yet as he tightened the turn and searched the sky ahead, nothing appeared where physics said something must exist. His sensors showed fragments, ghost returns that vanished before they could be classified. His helmet display refused to settle on a target. Then came the moment that unsettled even the veterans in the control room. The Typhoon stopped calling. Not because it was defeated, but because the fight had entered a phase no one could narrate in real time. The engagement had collapsed into pure geometry, energy, and silence. Observers later described it as watching two predators circle in tall grass, visible only by the way the grass moved. When the exercise resumed and voices finally returned to the net, no one rushed to explain what had happened. Pilots spoke carefully. Controllers chose their words. And the official debrief would later reduce the encounter to a few sterile lines of text. But everyone present understood the same thing. For a brief moment over red flag, the world's most advanced fighters met, and the quiet said more than any radio call ever could. The Eurofighter Typhoon did not arrive at red flag as a curiosity. It arrived as a question. Painted in subdued gray and carrying the confidence of Europe's frontline air power, the Typhoon rolled onto the Nevada tarmac among aircraft that had defined American air dominance for decades. F-15s, F-16s, EA-18Gs, all familiar shapes. But the jet everyone watched for was the one few ever saw fly in anger, the F-22 Raptor, officially present, operationally invisible. Red flag was never an air show. It was a laboratory for combat realism, designed around a brutal truth of air warfare. The first 10 missions kill the unprepared. Every sortie was scripted to replicate chaos, dense electronic warfare, overlapping threats, degraded comms, and adversaries flown by instructors whose job was to embarrass you. If something failed here, it failed safely. If a pilot made a mistake, it was dissected in detail. The Typhoon crews understood this. Many of them were veterans of NATO quick reaction alerts and real intercepts over Europe. They trusted their aircraft, its raw thrust, its instantaneous turn rate, its powerful captor radar, and a helmet system designed to fight and win at extreme angles. On paper, the Typhoon was a knife fighter, fast, agile, lethal inside the merge. What it was not designed to face, at least not openly, was an aircraft built around denying the fight altogether. Briefings before the sortie were deliberately vague. The Typhoon pilots were told only that fifth-generation assets would be present, and that rules of engagement would evolve dynamically. No one said the word Raptor. No one needed to. The Americans never confirmed numbers, positions, or tactics. Even the mission commanders spoke in generalities, as if precision itself might leak something sensitive. When engines lit and aircraft began to taxi, the pod, atmosphere shifted. This was not about national pride or friendly competition. It was about learning where assumptions broke. In the cockpit, the Typhoon pilot reviewed the plan one last time. Radar modes, sensor fusion cues, visual scan priorities. He expected clutter, jamming, and deception, but also expected contact. Air combat at some level always announced itself. As the Typhoon lifted off into the Nevada sky and climbed toward the fight, there was no hint that this mission would be remembered differently. No warning, no dramatic sign. Only later would pilots agree on one thing. The most unsettling part of the engagement was not what the F-22 did. It was how early it erased the idea of a normal fight. The first indication that something was wrong came from the radar, not as a warning, but as hesitation. The Typhoon's sensors were doing exactly what they were designed to do. The captor radar swept ahead in wide arcs, feeding tracks into the fusion system, building a three-dimensional picture of the battle space. Friendly aircraft resolved cleanly. Known adversary profiles appeared where the briefing said they would. Yet in one sector of the sky, the data refused to behave. Returns flickered. A contact appeared at the edge of detection range, then collapsed into noise. The system tried again, narrowing the beam, increasing dwell time. Nothing stabilized. No firm velocity vector, no consistent altitude, just the suggestion that something was there and didn't want to be found. The pilot adjusted tactics instinctively. He changed radar modes, altered geometry, and pushed the jet harder, converting altitude into speed. The Typhoon surged forward, engines delivering the kind of acceleration that had humbled fourth-generation fighters in previous exercises. Inside the cockpit, the jet felt alive, responsive, aggressive, confident. Still, no lock. Then the electronic warfare cues began to misalign. Not the violent, obvious jamming pilots trained against, but something subtler. Threat ring has failed to form. Warning tones never arrived. The absence itself became the problem. In air combat, even deception usually leaves fingerprints. This left none. Range control asked for a status check. The Typhoon pilot replied professionally, carefully. He did not report a threat. He reported uncertainty. That single word triggered a tension in the control room. Uncertainty was not supposed to exist at this stage of the fight. As the Typhoon closed the distance, visual scan took over. Canopy clear, sun behind the jet. Perfect conditions to see an opponent if one existed. The pilot rolled slightly, searching across the horizon, expecting at any moment to spot a dark shape crossing his nose. Nothing crossed. What he did not know, what no one on his frequency could say, was that the engagement had already begun minutes earlier. The F-22 had been inside the fight from the start, shaping geometry, managing energy, choosing angles without ever announcing its presence. The Typhoon pilot felt it only as pressure. A tightening window. A sense that every maneuver was being watched by something he could not see. And then, without warning, the Typhoon's assumptions collapsed. A simulated kill tone sounded, brief, unemotional, final. No radar lock had preceded it. No visual contact had justified it. No radio call had warned him it was coming. In the silence that followed, one truth became unavoidable. This was not a contest of speed or turn rate anymore. It was a contest of who was allowed to exist on the battlefield at all. The debrief later would label it a merge, but in the moment, it did not feel like one. A merge was supposed to be chaotic. Two aircraft crossing at closing speeds that crushed the senses, pilots calling tally or no joy, bodies straining under G-forces as instinct took over. This was different. This was quiet, controlled, almost clinical, the type. Hoon pilot never saw the crossing point because the fight never revealed itself in physical space. After the first simulated kill, the scenario did not end. Red flag rules rarely allowed clean exits. The Typhoon was reset, repositioned, and sent back into the same airspace. This time with heightened awareness. The pilot knew what he was facing now. Or at least, he knew what, if not where. He tightened his formations with friendly aircraft, compressing spacing to complicate any unseen attacker's geometry. He flew unpredictably, varying altitude and speed, forcing any adversary to constantly recalculate. The Typhoon responded beautifully, carving the sky with precision, every control input translating instantly into motion. Still, the silence persisted. No radar spike, no missile warning, no visual cue. Then something changed. The Typhoon's sensors briefly aligned, just long enough to suggest proximity. Not a track, not a lock. A hint. The pilot reacted instantly, snapping the jet into a hard turn, pulling deep into the envelope where the Typhoon was supposed to dominate. This was the fight he had trained for. This was where stealth was supposed to matter less. For a fraction of a second, he thought he had forced it. The helmet display lagged, then cleared. The sky ahead remained empty. And once again, the kill tone sounded. This time, the control room went silent, too. Observers later described the moment as unsettling rather than impressive. The F-22 had not won by outturning or outrunning. It had simply refused to enter the Typhoon's world. Every attempt to drag the fight into a visible, narratable space failed. The Raptor dictated not just range, but reality. When the Typhoon pilot finally spoke, his voice was calm but measured. He did not complain. He did not argue the call. He asked a single question that echoed through the debrief room later that day. When exactly was I in the fight? No one answered immediately. Because the uncomfortable truth was this. The merge had happened on terms only one aircraft could perceive, and by the time the Typhoon felt it, the outcome had already been decided. The most revealing part of Red Flag did not happen in the air. It happened in a windowless room long after the jets had shut down. Pilots sat with notebooks closed. Helmets were stacked against the wall. On the main screen, the engagement replayed in clean digital lines, tracks, vectors, timestamps. This was where bravado usually died. Data did not care about reputation. The Typhoon's flight path looked aggressive and logical. Energy management was textbook. Turns were crisp. Transitions were fast. No wasted motion. In any previous Red Flag cycle, this profile would have produced multiple kills and a dominant score. Then the F-22 track appeared. Not all at once. Segment by segment. A line that curved gently around the Typhoon's path, always offset, always outside expected detection cones. It never crossed in front, never rushed, never reacted late. It was there early and stayed there. The room leaned forward. The Raptor had entered weapons employment range before the Typhoon's sensors registered anything meaningful. It had repositioned during moments the Typhoon pilot believed were neutral. When the Typhoon tightened the fight, the F-22 simply widened its geometry, maintaining advantage without ever surrendering invisibility. What unsettled the room was not that the F-22 won. Red Flag was full of losses. What unsettled them was how little drama there was in the data. No desperate escapes, no near misses, no moment where the outcome hung in balance. One of the Typhoon pilots finally spoke, not defensively, but analytically. So the fight was over before I reacted. An American instructor nodded once. Yes, but not before you flew well. That distinction mattered. The Typhoon had not failed. The pilot had not made mistakes. The problem was structural. The fight existed on a timeline the Typhoon could not see. As the replay ended, someone in the back of the room said what many were thinking, but few wanted recorded. If this had been real airspace, we'd never know why we didn't come home. No one argued. Because Red Flag had not just tested aircraft. It had exposed a shift in air combat logic, where silence was no longer a gap to be filled, but a weapon deliberately wielded. And that realization lingered far longer than the sortie itself. After Red Flag, the phrase began circulating informally among pilots and analysts. The exercise went quiet. It was not a technical term, and it did not appear in any official report. But everyone who had been there understood what it meant. It did not mean radios stopped working. It meant the usual language of air combat had broken down. In traditional fighter engagements, even bad situations produced information. Radar warnings screamed. Jammers announced themselves. Missiles gave clues through tone and timing. A pilot might be overwhelmed, but never unaware. The Typhoon experience at Red Flag challenged that assumption completely. Against the F-22, silence was not the absence of signals. It was the presence of control. The Raptor did not jam the Typhoon aggressively because it did not need to. It shaped the battle space by deciding when information would exist at all. Its low observable design reduced detection range to the point where the Typhoon's radar was solving a problem with missing variables. Its sensor fusion allowed the F-22 pilot to see a coherent picture while presenting none in return. From the Typhoon cockpit, this created a dangerous illusion that nothing decisive was happening. Maneuvers felt unopposed. Airspace felt empty. Time felt available. It was not. The F-22 was executing the fight at a distance measured not just in miles, but in awareness. Each second the Typhoon spent searching was a second the Raptor spell meant choosing. Each maneuver meant to provoke contact only refined the F-22's solution. One Typhoon pilot later summarized it bluntly. I wasn't outflown. I was outinformed. That distinction mattered for doctrine. Speed, agility, and pilot skill still mattered, but they no longer guaranteed engagement on equal terms. The aircraft that controlled information controlled tempo, geometry, and outcome. By the end of the exercise, no one was talking about dogfights anymore. They were talking about timelines, detection windows, who forced whom to react, and who never had to. Red Flag had not proven the Typhoon weak. It had proven that modern air combat could be decided long before two jets ever came close enough to see each other. And that was the quiet that unsettled everyone the most. When Red Flag ended, the official summaries were careful. They spoke of learning opportunities, integration with fifth-generation assets, and valuable allied cooperation. Nothing in those documents captured what actually shifted. The change happened in how pilots talked when microphones were off. Before this exercise, debates about air dominance often revolved around performance charts, turn rates, thrust-to-weight ratios, missile ranges. The Typhoon was strong on those charts. In some regimes, it still is. But Red Flag forced a more uncomfortable question. What happens when the fight never enters those regimes at all? The F-22 had not proven invincible. It had proven asymmetric. It forced opponents to play a game where traditional strengths arrived too late to matter. By the time a Typhoon pilot felt confident enough to commit, the engagement had already been shaped beyond recovery. For Allied air forces, this carried weight. Typhoon units were not fringe players. They represented the backbone of European air defense. If they could be neutralized without obvious failure, the IMPO. Ications reached far beyond one exercise. Instructors began adjusting how they taught threat recognition. Silence itself became a warning condition. No contacts was no longer reassuring. It was suspicious. Pilots were trained to assume an unseen presence, rather than wait for confirmation. Strategists took note as well. The exercise reinforced the idea that fifth-generation aircraft were not simply better fighters. They were battlespace managers. They decided who fought, when, and on what terms. Fourth-generation jets could still be lethal, but only when the environment was shaped for them. This was the moment Red Flag truly went quiet. Not in the air, but in the assumptions that had guided decades of air combat thinking. Because once you accept that the most dangerous opponent may never announce himself, the entire logic of engagement changes. And Red Flag made that impossible to ignore. Years later, no official Red Flag briefing slide is titled Typhoon versus F-22. There is no dramatic chart marked turning point, no public scorecard that declares a winner, and that absence is deliberate. Because what happened over Nevada was not a victory that fit neatly into statistics. The Eurofighter Typhoon flew exactly as it was designed to fly, fast, aggressive, confident in its strengths. Its pilots made no reckless errors. They did not lose because they hesitated or misunderstood their aircraft. They lost because the fight they prepared for never truly arrived. The F-22 did not dominate by showing superiority in a visible contest. It dominated by denying the contest altogether. It removed itself from the opponent's decision loop, leaving the Typhoon reacting to fragments of reality rather than a complete picture. By the time information became actionable, the outcome was already locked in. That is why Red Flag went quiet. Not because of silence in the radios, but because the old language of air combat no long, ear applied. Calls, cues, and instincts built over decades suddenly felt outdated. The exercise exposed a future where air dominance was less about who could outturn or outclimb, and more about who controlled what the enemy was allowed to perceive. For Allied pilots, the lesson was sobering. For planners, it was clarifying. And for anyone watching the evolution of air warfare, it marked a line in time. From that moment on, silence was no longer reassuring. It was the loudest warning of all. If this moment at Red Flag changed how you think about air combat, let me know in the comments. Was this the point where fourth-generation fighters lost control of the fight? Or is there still a way to pull stealth into the open? Subscribe for more real military aviation stories, declassified exercises, and the moments that quietly rewrote air war history.